Well, good afternoon. This is Robert Phoenix, looking rather unruly today. My gosh, look at my hair. Yeah, I'm doing the FARcast over here on the radio FARcast page, aka the 11th House, over on YouTube. We got a couple people. Hey, Missy, what's happening? White Wolf, greetings, White Wolf, to you. White Wolf 28. Hello, Amy D. How is everyone? We're going to go down some rabbit holes today. There's Judy. What's happening? FF up 77. Salutations to you. Man, challenging day this morning. Challenging morning, just energy-wise. Wow. It's been a long week. A lot of clients. Did I make it? Yeah, Lori, you just made it. Good job. Watching the Tarot movie. Yeah, Tarot movie is really good. There's Maurice. Hello, Maurice. Good to see you around, Maurice. Welcome back into the listening club. And, oh, yeah, we got a new thing with me and Heather that came up yesterday. I got to post it over here as well. It's over on Heather's page as well, her channel. Yeah, that was a good one. Heather and I are doing a webinar, and that's going to be on October 20th. And we're going to get super in-depth around the changing of the nodes, eclipses, and the shift from Jupiter in Scorpio to Jupiter in Sagittarius. So if you have any inclination to find out more about this, you should go over to, you can get there on Heather's webpage right now. And after this show, you can go over on my website, my Facebook page. I'm going to pin it to the top of my pages. It's been a long week, man. It's been an intense work week for me. We have Oktoberfest here in Fredericksburg. 30,000 people descend upon our little town of 8,000, where it's Oktoberfest every day. But this is the time of year where people like to come out and drink a bunch of German beer, eat a bunch of sausages, and get their German on, their Allemand. They're Allemand, and this is a German community. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to sort of reference some of that later on in the show. And we give you some updates about Brett Kavanaugh. Let me do this here. Just want to get some information lined up to share with you about Fredericksburg and the place that I'm living in. It's kind of an interesting place. We get into this a little bit later. Okay. So apparently Brett Kavanaugh has been confirmed. He's on his way to be nominated. Well, he's already nominated. Oh, look who's here today. It's Rosie. Rosie says, I want to get in there. I want to get in there before Jasper does. I want to say hi to everybody, Rosie. She's not as aggressive as Jasper when it comes to like trying to love the screen, if you know what I mean. Here she goes. She just wanted to come in and say hi. So Brett Kavanaugh they're going to vote tomorrow on a Saturday. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like he's going to be our next appointee to the Supreme Court. And it's been a very interesting process. And the process itself, I think, says more about where we are in a lot of ways than perhaps maybe Kavanaugh himself, although as he tries to unhook himself from his wonderful cat's claws, even Kavanaugh has some, how shall we say this, troubling aspects, which I'm going to talk about today. And they don't have to deal with Christine Blasey Ford. I'm going to get into some of the things about Brett Kavanaugh that we need to be aware of. Now, I'm in favor of the process going forward. I've always been in favor of that process. I don't think that Brett Kavanaugh was somebody who could be denied his position on the Supreme Court based on what we were seeing. And now the left is starting to devour itself, which is what they do. Now there's a pissing match going on between Michael Moore and Kathy Griffin. And Michael Moore is sort of being the cheerleader now for the left, saying, we can do this, we can take him down. And Kathy Griffin, being the realist, is saying, get over it, we lost. So this is going to be very interesting to see what happens when Kavanaugh does get appointed. And I do believe he's going to get appointed. I think they're going to have the votes. And I think there's enough power behind Kavanaugh in a number of different circles in order to move him into the Supreme Court justice seat. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and who and what I believe Brett Kavanaugh is. Now, look, we need to have these people vetted. This much is true. This much is true. However, that said, I believe that what we were witnessing was a dog and pony show. It was a circus. And the real things that he should have been vetted over and for were completely left out of the process, which I think it could be by design or luckily for Brett Kavanaugh, due to the fact that the Democrats were looking at this as a major battle. I mean, if we're talking about a war, and we are in a war, if you haven't figured it out, we're in a war right now. We're in a culture war. We're in a revolutionary war funded by George Soros. And George Soros, I was talking with a friend of mine this morning, and George Soros, really, in my estimation, is more of a bag man than a boogeyman. I think George Soros is probably a bag man for the Rothschilds. This has been my contention for a number of years now. And the reason why I think that's the case is because you cannot participate on the global stage with significant amounts of wealth unless you are approved. Unless you're approved. And we saw this back in the 1900s when the robber barons of this country, people like J. Paul Getty, John David Rockefeller, Carnegie Mellon, all these people, right? They had to go through the Rothschilds. Baron Rothschild, or his son at that time, who was it? Was it Nathan? Sent over a guy by the name of Jacob Schiff. And Jacob Schiff essentially got Getty and Rockefeller and Carnegie and Mellon and all these characters, right? Got them all together and introduced himself, told them that he was a representative of the House of Rothschild and that the House of Rothschild was very interested in working with them. And they were all very wealthy at that time. They were on top of the game. They were the oligarchs of a new world, a new country, where there were resources that had untapped, land to be filled and populated, infrastructure to be built. And they knew that that was their time because they were acquiring resources, vast amounts of resources. When you do that, you can build and grow. So they looked at this little man with a funny accent, and they basically laughed. And they said, well, why do we need you? Why do we need Lord Rothschild? We're doing just fine here. Go away. Go away. We don't really need you. Jacob Schiff said, fine, suit yourself, but you'll be hearing from me again. And I believe you'll have a very different opinion upon working with us the next time we meet. So he left, and shortly thereafter, guess what happened? their wealth took a dive. Their stocks tumbled significantly. Jacob Schiff met with them again, and he said, do you think there was any coincidence that your stocks and your holdings took a precipitous dive upon our last meeting? And they said, well, we've come to the conclusion that the markets were being manipulated so that our stocks did take a tumble, did take a dive, and our holdings did drop, and we've figured out that it was your boss, Mr. Rothschild, who was behind it all. It's got their attention, didn't it? So what happened? They decided to play ball. And those guys, through the influence of the House of Rothschild and their influence with a number of U.S. senators and congresspeople, wound up creating the Federal Reserve Bank here in this country. And they were rewarded for their service by not having their wealth snatched from them and being wiped out. You see, you get to a certain level, and this is what happens. You become part of a club. If you don't become part of the club, you lose your wealth. So to think that George Soros can run around the world and independently start revolutions here and there with an unlimited checkbook or pocketbook is patently absurd. Because George Soros isn't George Soros unless he is vetted and approved. That's the way it goes. Anybody at an extremely rich level has to be vetted and approved and taken into the confidence of the Rothschild banking network, because it's all connected via central banks. If you want to get a loan, you got to go to a central bank. If you want to get a legit loan, you can get off the book loans, right? And the interest on that is quite different, but you can get it. So anyway, George Soros has been leading these color revolutions. And this is what we've been seeing. And we'll continue to see this because it creates the left-right dynamic, the Hegelian dialectic, and what we call the pincer effect. And I've talked about this before. The pincer effect is when two sides begin to squeeze. This is a military tactic where one flank comes in from one side and one flank comes in from the other side, and it begins to squeeze the front. So if you have a battalion or a troop, the pincer effect comes in, they can't get outside the flank, they're squeezed into the middle and then ultimately surrounded, and then they're very vulnerable. There's no possible way to retreat after that point. So we're in the pincer effect now. And the Kavanaugh event was a very fine example of it. So we're shown the histrionics of this woman, Christine Blasey Ford, who many believe, myself included, has been tampered with. Either she hypnotized herself or she was triggered, trauma, mind controlled. She's got the bona fides. It's in the background. It's what she's written about. It's what she teaches. It's who she studied with. So when we see her basically become a 12-year-old girl before our very eyes, and that's what we saw, it becomes pretty clear that something's not right in Denmark, right? And then we have Dianne Feinstein, who is in big trouble. I put up a video on Facebook, and it's Feinstein just getting the FBI report, and the look on her face is nothing like I've seen from her. This is a woman who is always supremely confident, on top of her game, and has no problem fronting at any level, at any time. And what I saw was somebody who was shaken to their core, which means that likely she will go under some form of FBI investigation. And it might have to do with Blasey Ford or the leaking of her letter/email. And it could be lights out for Dianne Feinstein. And she could lose her seat quite easily. This could be the end of Dianne Feinstein. And she might, and I think she knows it. I think she absolutely knows it. So the other thing that we've seen is this so-called travesty of justice. And it is a travesty. It's a circus. It's a carnival. It's a sideshow. And we're looking at the left as being the progenitors of chaos. And that's what they are. That's what they're there to do. This is how a revolution is fomented. You traffic in chaos, chaos and resistance, chaos and resistance, chaos and resistance. So when we look at that from a place of being rational, the parts of us that indulge in something called order, we look at that and we say, holy crap, these people are nuts. I don't want any part of that. Why? Because as much as we probably hate the government on some level, as much as we mistrust or distrust the government on some level of order and continuity is actually more advisable than a complete and utter breakdown. And people will always opt for that. And I believe in this instance, that is actually the correct choice. Now, if they were going after Kavanaugh for other things, his participation with, say, writing the Patriot Act, or his connection to Freemasonry and being a Jesuit, well, that might be an interesting discussion to have, and one that might be a lot more pertinent. Or what he did during the Vince Foster trial. That's another piece of information that was kind of left out of the whole thing. Those pieces, we didn't get anything from from Kavanaugh about his relationship to the First Amendment, to the Second Amendment, to the Fourth Amendment. None of it. What we got was a man defending himself, and defending himself in a very strident, an emotional, edgy kind of way. And I don't think that was manufactured, by the way, because I think that he was ambushed. He didn't know this was coming, at least not in the way that he thought it would. Because this is a guy with connections. He went to Yale. I don't know if he is a member of Skull and Bones, but we know that George W. Bush was, and that his wife worked for George W. Bush for quite a long period of time. So there's a deep connection to the Bush family with Mr. Kavanaugh. Now, there are people who are thinking that he's not going to be passed. He'll be voted down, and because of his connection to the Bush family, Trump actually set the whole thing up. I don't know. Trump's been pretty ambivalent about Mr. Kavanaugh. When it came out to sort of ordering another FBI investigation, Trump didn't waste any time, did he? He didn't jaw around, didn't do what he normally does, which is tweet at 3 in the morning after he's finished his last Big Mac. So I do believe he's going to be passed. But if he doesn't get passed, then we could maybe assume that this was a setup and that Trump is getting over on the Bushes. However, that remains to be seen. Because Kavanaugh does have very deep ties, and he is a Jesuit, and Trump happens to be a Jesuit as well. He went to 2 Jesuit schools. He went to Fordham and he went to Penn. Those are Jesuit colleges. Now, if he went to Yale, there's a pretty good chance he might be a member of Skull and Bones. Wouldn't that have been an interesting thing to talk about and vet? Of course. We didn't get any of that. What we got was this sideshow. So when we see this, what happens? You can have 2 emotional responses. You identify with the victim, or you disidentify with the victim because you feel that the victim isn't being truthful, or there are extenuating circumstances that might actually be affecting the victim's mental health, which I've already alluded to. In which case, you look at the other side and say, well, this is more rational. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids. He's just a Supreme Court justice anyway. How's this going to affect me? Rubber stamp and get him in there. Let's move on. And by the way, that's probably the right reaction to the whole thing, to be honest with you. But you see, what we're not understanding about this process is we're being given essentially 2 false versions of reality and 2 false versions of an organizing principle where we think we have some level of choice. In actuality, we really don't. Because let's be clear about this. Let's say somebody, I don't know, Jonathan Turley. This is a pretty well-known guy. Or let's say the guy who runs, whatchamacallit, the people who are always doing the Freedom of Information Act stuff. Let's say one of these outsiders, a real outsider, somebody who's really, really, really into like constitutional law, organic law, natural law. Let's say you get one of these guys in there, or gals for that matter. Do you think they're going to be voted into the Supreme Court? The answer is no. Absolutely not. No, they wouldn't make it. So we look at the choices that have come through Trump, Gorsuch, and now Kavanaugh. They look very, very conservative on the surface, or in all likelihood, they're probably not entirely conservative. That's my sense. But it looks good. It's a good package. Certainly a good package. And then before that, who did we have? Well, we had John Roberts, Sotomayor, and we had Elena Kagan. So we're going to get these candidates. Either way, we're going to get candidates that are going to support a certain paradigm. That's the way it is. And Kavanaugh happens to be part of that paradigm. So we're opting into the process. He's probably going to be voted in. That's my sense. And what happens after that is anybody's guess. Because there are going to be people who are going to be angry that yet somebody else who supposedly is a misogynist, a liar, an inveterate drunk, a dry drunk, according to USA Today, perhaps even a pedophile, which has absolutely zero cause to be taken seriously. He doesn't have a history of it. And by the way, if he did, people would find that shit out. They'd figure it out. This is the guy that's going to be elected. But he's going to be elected based on a contrasting point of view, not based on anything that is really a part of his record or how he would vote or what his views were on certain things. Now, that may come up tomorrow. I doubt it. I think it'll be a one-day process. And it's interesting that it's taking place on the weekend, right? On the Sabbath. Because Saturday is the true Sabbath, not Sunday. Saturday is the true Sabbath. Sabado, right? Sabbath day. So I wanted to talk a little bit about his past. Brett Kavanaugh's past. Let's see if I can find some of this information here that I have. Let's see, got that. So this is from a website called the Constitutional Reasons to. The website is FEE, Foundation for Economic Education. And this is titled The Constitutional Reasons to Oppose Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. This is written by Brittany Hunter. I'm going to read this. After 2 days of political theater, the Senate Judiciary Committee agreed to delay the vote to confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court for a week. In that time, the FBI will conduct an investigation surrounding the allegations made against him by Christine Blasey Ford. By now, no one is a stranger to the claims of sexual assault that have been levied against Judge Kavanaugh. In fact, the entire country has been so wrapped up in this case, it is hard to determine what is fact and what is simply partisan politics rearing its ugly head. Between Cory Booker's lengthy monologue that sounded more like a campaign stump speech than anything else, and Lindsey Graham's unexpected passionate rant. I've never seen Lindsey Graham like that before. It is clear that both sides are putting way too much stake on the outcome of these hearings. And the real losers, unfortunately, are the American people who are diligently distracted from Kavanaugh's actual policy record. So we're going to get into this now. To be sure, claims of sexual misconduct should be certainly brought to the public's attention, especially when they involve a nominee for a position as powerful as Supreme Court Justice. And in the hashtag #MeToo era, failing to take these allegations seriously would be most unwise. But losing ourselves in this political circus and the subsequent media frenzy surrounding Kavanaugh's sexual past glosses over another aspect of his professional career that should concern every individual: his promotion of the national security state. Okay, do you see where this is going? What we focused on was the histrionic battle of the Republic in an epic he said, she said. But really, what was it covering up? What were we being distracted from? Here we go. The Patriot Act. The years of 2001, 2003 were confusing for Americans, as many tried to grapple with the fact that living in the greatest country on earth did not make us immune to large-scale terrorist attacks. I'll save my commentary for that. There are also the years that these are also the years that Brett Kavanaugh served as associate White House counsel for then President George W. Bush. In the aftermath of 9/11, many people began to believe that the government not only had a right to take drastic security measures against its own people, but that our livelihoods actually depended on it. This fear gave birth to the monstrous national security state we live in today, where without just cause, civilians began being treated like criminals in our own country. One of the most egregious acts perpetrated against the American people at this time was the Patriot Act, and one of its greatest supporters was Brett Kavanaugh. According to the Electronic Privacy Information Center, which filed a Freedom of Information request for Kavanaugh's official government correspondence records from this era, the Supreme Court Justice nominee referred to the Patriot Act as a measured, careful, responsible, and constitutional approach in an email sent to a colleague. Anyone who knows anything about the Patriot Act knows that constitutional and careful are by no means accurate descriptions. The Patriot Act obliterated the Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights to privacy and due process by giving federal governments sweeping new powers to conduct surveillance on the American people. But his support of the legislation that signaled the downfall of American rule of law does not simply end with his favorable comments. Kavanaugh was also one of the individuals tasked with its drafting. He has been definitively credited with the line, "The new law will update laws authorizing government surveillance." And just this one line is rather problematic in itself. If he is the constitutionalist he has claimed to be on several occasions, then he would know that the Constitution already prohibits the government from broad, warrantless searches of this nature. This is not a protection that can be simply updated. And yet, his nonchalance over abolishing certain constitutional protections without a discussion of adopting an actual amendment is disconcerting. The torture memos. The public's discovery of the torture memos was a dark time in modern American history. We've been riding our moral high horse during the early years of the War on Terror, pretending that America was the global beacon of moral and ethical treatment. But when the memos, which were originally composed while Kavanaugh served in the Bush administration, were released in 2004, the entire world caught a glimpse of just how ugly military interventions really were. The memos told a story of members of the Bush administration attempting to broadly expand the legal definition of torture to justify such horrific acts as waterboarding and sleep deprivation as permissible. They also told of the administration's quest to seek the authority to label anyone of their choosing an enemy combatant, thus subjecting them to the possibility of indefinite detention in awful facilities like Guantanamo Bay. Their publication also added fuel to the already growing fire of animosity against George W. Bush, who at the time of the memo's creation was the employer of Judge Kavanaugh. In 2006, when Judge Kavanaugh was being questioned by the Senate Judiciary Committee as he wanted to be confirmed to the Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia Circuit, he went on the record stating that he knew nothing of these memos before their public release. At several points during his hearing, he denied having anything to do with these memos, specifically stating that he was not involved in any conversations regarding the rules governing the detention of combatants. He also denied ever having seen the correspondence at all. He even told Senator Leahy, there he is again, I think with respect to the legal justifications or the policies relating to the treatment of detainees, I was not aware of any issues on that or the legal memos that subsequently came out. This was not part of my docket, either in the counsel's office or as staff secretary. The reason this has raised red flags for those already skeptical about Kavanaugh is that his position at the time dictated that memos and other written correspondences would have passed by his desk at some point before reaching their end recipient. So he was aware of these memos. Enemy combatants. Additionally, a year after the 2006 hearing, the Washington Post reported on a contentious meeting that had occurred in the White House in 2002. The conversation was centered on speculation as to whether or not the Supreme Court would accept the Bush administration's assertion they could label an American citizen an enemy combatant at their discretion, allowing the person in question to be locked up for an indefinite amount of time. As per Washington Post reporting, Judge Kavanaugh was not only present at this meeting, but was specifically summoned to weigh in on the matter since he was himself a former clerk for swing vote Judge Justice Kennedy. At the meeting, he voiced his concerns that Justice Kennedy and other swing voters on the Supreme Court would never side with the administration's controversial decision. This meeting was brought up again just a couple of weeks ago, addressing the concerns some senators still have over Kavanaugh's insistence that he had no role in such conversations when it appears that he did. Okay, this goes back to his chart where he's got the Sun-Neptune square and the Mercury-Neptune square. Okay, Brett Kavanaugh does not tell the truth. Now, does that apply to his entanglement with Christine Blasey Ford? Perhaps, perhaps not. I don't think we're ever going to know the truth about that. Does that apply to his glossied over the fact that he likes beer? Likely. But each time you get into Neptune, you get into things like alcohol. He probably likes a lot more than beer, and he probably drank till he passed out when he was of drinking age. I have no doubt about this. As the New Yorker points out, first attending this meeting or even just contributing a reading of Justice Kennedy's likely view would seem to constitute taking part in a discussion on detention policies and thus to contradict Kavanaugh's sworn testimony. Senator Durbin, who sat on the Judicial Committee in 2006, sent Kavanaugh a letter in which he states, "Let me," but he never received a response, even after he followed up with Kavanaugh recently after he received the Supreme Court nomination. The problem with Brett Kavanaugh has less to do with his connection with Christine Blasey Ford as it does have to do with his, how shall we say this, faulty memory around his participation in the events such as the creation of the Patriot Act and adding counsel to whatever decision was being made at that time for things like indefinite detention and being able to label Americans enemy combatants. Metadata due process, for me, not for the 2013 Edward Snowden leaks were arguably one of the most significant events to occur over the last decade. I would say yes and no, to be honest with you. Anybody who followed anything that was connected to state surveillance technology, whatever, everything that Snowden brought up, we already knew. Snowden was just doing kind of a grandstanding end around to get a lot of attention and to get people who weren't aware of this stuff on some level to kind of, I've got my opinions on Edward Snowden. I believe Edward Snowden is an inside guy. He's an inside man. And they could have snatched him at any point in time if they wanted to. Trust me. Especially when he was downloading those files in Langley. You don't download files in Langley without people knowing what you're doing on your computer. But I'll read this anyway. The 2013 Edward Snowden leaks are arguably one of the most significant events to occur over the last decade. For those who thought the government wasn't capable of this magnitude of corruption, the blindfold was removed and the government's true intentions were revealed. For those already skeptical, the leaks had confirmed pre-existing suspicions. In many ways, the Snowden situation drew a line in the political sand. Those who stood for freedom believed in the people's inherent right to privacy in upholding the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. But those who supported and sustained the government's mass surveillance of its own people made their views on individual liberty very clear. And Judge Kavanaugh was not on the right side of history. At the heart of the Snowden situation was the question of whether or not metadata counted as government surveillance. The government frantically scrambled to justify its actions, insisted it was not actually data collection, since metadata did not technically provide any raw data. But metadata still gives a very specific information about the type of data collected, and therefore is still in violation of constitutional protections. So what we're talking about here is the thin line. So let's say, for instance, the metadata that would be collected from the government from me would be things like the websites I go to, the type of music I listen to, the type of YouTube videos that I watch, people that are part of my email list, people that are my friends on Facebook. This is all considered metadata. What I buy online, what I buy offline. This is all metadata. And it's through the accrual of metadata that they're able to actually create a profile. Now, what happens is that the difference between metadata and real data would be something like absolutely grabbing all of my emails. That would be data. Going into my computer and looking directly at my files, right? Which probably happens, who knows? That would be data. Listening in on my phone calls, that would be raw data. Metadata is the aggregate pieces of information that aren't specifically related to actual data itself. Okay? So the United States government made an argument that said, if we are not directly taking a person's private data, then metadata or metadata is game. It's fair game. It's out there because everybody has it. Everybody's doing it. A lot of it is in the marketplace. Right? If it's in a transaction with Amazon, the government says we need to know because we can build a profile. If we build a profile, this person might be a terrorist and somebody of interest. This is what their argument was. I'm going to continue to read this. However, in a ruling in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District Circuit Court, D.C. District Court, D.C. Circuit, Kavanaugh ruled that the government's metadata collection program is entirely consistent with the Fourth Amendment. So he made a ruling on this. Was this brought up during this process with Blasey Ford? No, it wasn't. What did we have? We had a shootout between the sexes. And look at her, look at him. What choices are you going to make? I know some people would say I'm with her. Okay. But I would say the vast majority would say this is nuts, this is insanity. Let's move on with the process. And to that extent, I actually believe they're right. This is the tricky part. Based on what we were seeing and witnessing and what we were debating, this is the right process. And in a weird way, the right candidate for that process. We weren't talking about any of this. And if that was the case, then he would not be the right candidate. And the process would be quite different. And I guarantee you, those people on the left would not have a stick in the game. They wouldn't have any skin in the game because it does not match their platform and playing for identity politics, which is what they've been doubling down on. Stuff like this is where I get really pissed off at the left. They've got no desire to untangle this stuff. The things that really matter: privacy, the Patriot Act, 9/11, passing the buck. Even their guy, Barack Obama, did the same thing. He rubber stamped and renewed the Patriot Act. Well, maybe if it's good enough for Obama, it's good enough for them. These are the issues that they should be active about. We got not one peep of this during the entire process. So during the process, based on what we saw, the logical take on it is that it has to continue based on what was on the table. It's the way it is. Do you see how this worked? We're not talking about any of this stuff. That's all in the background, and there's more to come. I'll continue to read this. He also later stated that that critical national security need outweighs the impact on privacy occasioned by this program. I'll read it to you again. He also later stated, these are in quotes, that critical national security need outweighs the impact on privacy occasioned by this program. See you later. See you later, privacy. See you later, privacy. Again, a rather odd conclusion for such a staunch constitutionalist to support. Congressman Amash expressed his concerns with Kavanaugh's ruling, tweeting, "Future decisions on the constitutionality of government surveillance of Americans will be huge. We can't afford a rubber stamp for the executive branch. This mass surveillance of the American people not only violated the specific statutes in the Fourth Amendment that specified how individuals could be searched by the state, but it also violated the right of due process, the same due process that Kavanaugh has asked be upheld while he undergoes the confirmation process. Due process is a staple of our American legal system. And while the allegations made by victims of sexual assault should be listened to and investigated, I agree. I said that yesterday. If somebody has a really just grimy, salacious, underhanded, cruel past, and there is a continued pattern of specific abuse, of course, that needs to be talked about, and it needs to be fleshed out and brought into the public. And I believe that, and I agree with that. I don't believe with the politicization of a lot of what's happening, but if we're going to vet somebody and that's part of the process, then it needs to be a part of it. I don't believe that that's what we saw with Kavanaugh and Blasey Ford. But I'll continue to read. There is more to due process than allowing Judge Kavanaugh to have his day in court. If the government would like to gain access to the private communications of American citizens, it must do so by going to a judge and obtaining a warrant. This warrant must specifically state what property is being searched and what is being searched for, as is specified by the Fourth Amendment. Requiring law enforcement to go through the proper channels to secure a warrant before violating the privacy of American citizens is part of due process. You cannot support some due process while blatantly abolishing certain safeguards that guarantee this right to Americans. To be sure, accusers of sexual assault deserve to be heard, but before we pass judgment, due process needs to occur. But due process is not meant for one class of people. It is meant for every American citizen, whether they are nominated for the Supreme Court like Kavanaugh or happen to have a radicalized parent like 16-year-old Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, who was targeted and killed by the U.S. military without any semblance of due process. What's at stake? Currently, the entire country is obsessed with focusing on one very narrow aspect of Judge Kavanaugh's life. True, if these claims turn out to be correct, there was a legitimate cause for alarm. But even if the allegations proved to be false, there are still serious concerns surrounding Kavanaugh's confirmation on the Supreme Court that should not be ignored. Most of our lives are now digital, which makes our information extremely vulnerable to hackers, both private and government sanctioned. We cannot afford to put ourselves at risk by empowering judicial candidates who have a proven track record of trampling on Fourth Amendment rights. Additionally, if there is ever a day when it is possible for Edward Snowden to return to the U.S. and receive a fair trial before the Supreme Court, it is hoped that our justices will be up to the task. And given Kavanaugh's record of upholding the surveillance state in favor of national security, that future is highly unlikely. Well done, Brittany Hunter. You can go find that article at fee.org. I'll put this link in the description for today's show. You'll be able to check it out. Let me get into the chat room, see what's happening in there. What are you guys talking about? So Beverly Lawrence says, actually, I was aware of all this. I believe the only way for Trump to drain the swamp is the military tribunals to keep Hillary and Obama from getting off on a technicality. Okay, could be. See, the military tribunals in a police state, you know, it's a really mixed bag. It's a real mixed bag. I mean, do you drain the swamp and have military tribunals and have a police state, and what happens after that? I think because that's what would happen, there would have to be martial law. There would have to be some form of martial law. Because if indeed there were tribunals for Clinton and Obama and the entire crew, people would go fucking nuts. I mean, the left would go nuts. There would be riots in the streets. Trump would be accused of being a fascist. Now, could it all be done cloak and dagger at Guantanamo? Nobody ever knows about it. And it's all hinted at and referred to in some cryptic messaging over on 8chan. Maybe, perhaps. But I think Trump is ostentatious and he's a showman. He's a showman. And so what we would see would be that which is revealed to us as a spectacle. Let's see. Bush, CIA, baby. What else? 50,000 sealed indictments. Hey, right there. We've been talking about these indictments for a while now. Hey, look, they happen. They happen. Okay, I'm all for it, but right now it's all talk. It's all talk. Anything else? Bush's, Obama's always swapping spit. That's true. Yeah. So let me read you another thing about false flag would make martial law palatable to most Americans. 9/11. That'd have to be a hell of a false flag. Let's put it that way. Trust me, it'd be really big. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Vince Foster case and the role that Brett Kavanaugh played in it. So Brett Kavanaugh was working as counsel for Kenneth Starr, who, of course, was investigating the Clintons. Now, the Clintons and the Bushes have an incestuous relationship. Incestuous. So a lot of people think that Kavanaugh screwed the the Clintons over, and that what's going on is payback, that the Clintons deployed sort of their Democratic operatives to go after Brett Kavanaugh. I don't really believe that that's the case. And here's why. Most people remember the Vince Foster case. He was murdered in Fort Marcy Park. He was murdered. He did not commit suicide there. You don't commit suicide with 2 bullets to the back of your head. 1 bullet maybe, but that's awkward. There are more effective and efficient ways by committing suicide. I have not thought about them, by the way. That's my disclaimer. So there was a great deal going on with Vince Foster as it related to what was happening with the Clintons and Whitewater and the Rose Law Firm scandal. You know, that was their version at that time. That was their version of what was happening or what's happening to Trump with the Russian collusion. And Hillary was railing against the fact that there was some great right-wing conspiracy that wanted to take them out. They were applying pressure. It's what happens at that level of the game. And when a pressure is applied, then you know that you're probably not in a really safe place most of the time. So you have to call in favors and trust people who would be your allies in situations where your political career and perhaps even your own quote unquote freedom is at stake or in jeopardy. And at that point, you become compromised. That's what happens. So I'm going to read this paragraph here. And there's a lot going on with Kenneth Starr. And there is a Foster grand jury. There was a grand jury that was set up to, in part, deal with the Vince Foster case. This was connected to the Rose Law Firm and all that stuff, right? That was going on at that time. And I'm just going to cut to the paragraph here. They're talking about, this is from WND.com, which is interesting because you would think that WND.com would actually be sort of pro-Kavanaugh in some ways. But I'm going to continue to read this. They're talking about a guy by the name of Rodriguez, who was a witness to what had taken place. His name is Miguel Rodriguez, and Starr accused Rodriguez of improper conduct before the grand jury that was investigating the Foster death. By the way, Kenneth Starr was on I think he was the president of Baylor. Recently, when Baylor went through this horrible rape scandal with its football team, and I believe its basketball team too. The provost, is that what he is? Anyway, Kenneth Starr was like the equivalent of the president of Baylor. I think it's his alma mater. And he had to quit. He had to step down because that fiasco was horrible. And he got off lucky. He left. He might have even gotten money when he left. I don't know. That's just some recent history for Kenneth Starr. Okay. So I'm going to read this. Starr accuses Rodriguez of improper conduct before the grand jury that was investigating the Foster death. Miguel began bringing witnesses before a Washington grand jury, but raised eyebrows by his accusatory questioning of U.S. Park police officers. Okay, so let me just contextualize. So Miguel Rodriguez was the assistant United States attorney who was the attorney at Starr's Office of Independent Counsel. I know Kavanaugh is a part of this too. Keep that in mind. Miguel began bringing witnesses before a Washington grand jury, but raised eyebrows by his accusatory questioning of the U.S. Park police officers and other witnesses. He seemed to believe, before hearing all the evidence, that Foster had been murdered in a different location, then dumped at Fort Marcy Park. This was the stuff of the conspiracy theories that flourished immediately after the reports of Foster's death. We were after the truth, and only the truth. Yet there was no justification for browbeating or mistreating any grand jury witnesses. This is Kenneth Starr, by the way. My D.C. deputy, Mark Tuohy, was outraged by some of the stories he had heard about Miguel's strange demeanor and off-the-wall questions in the grand jury room. Even grand jurors were complaining. One day in early 1995, I spent several hours with Miguel, walking around the mall and talking, trying to understand his viewpoint and strategy. But his answers made little sense, as if he were listening predominantly to pundits, not to the witnesses. Hickman went with Miguel out to Fort Marcy Park to check out the scene. which Miguel said he knew like the back of his hand. It was icy. Miguel couldn't find the location. Hickman slipped and fell, seriously injuring his back. It was a disaster. Angry that he was being challenged by his supervisors, on January 17th, 1995, Miguel announced that he quit. His irresponsible comments were later spread as proof here. There was a cover-up of a conspiracy reaching to the White House. All nonsense. But some took his stories at face value. Hickman began to see reprinted anonymous postcards, over 300, with the words, "Bring back Miguel." I rolled my eyes in disbelief when I saw the postcards, which seemed to have been promoted by an advocacy group based in Southern California. This was madness, yet another illustration of the paranoid strain in American politics. It was a grim reminder that this investigation had to be comprehensive and complete. We could not afford to leave any stone unturned. But the investigation also had to be conducted professionally, consistent with DOJ policy. Honest differences of opinion often occur in investigations. That was one reason I stressed the deliberative process, the roundtable discussions that some prosecutors and investigators thought slowed things down. But a rogue prosecutor given free rein in a grand jury can do serious damage to the integrity of the process. Hello, Mr. Mueller. I was thankful that of the dozens of prosecutors and agents who worked with the OIC under my supervision, I experienced many differences of opinions, but few serious problems. Here comes the Kavanaugh stuff now. It is odd that Starr states that he stressed the deliberative process, the roundtable discussions that were some prosecutors and investigators thought slowed things down. Rodriguez clearly valued the deliberative process and roundtable discussions. His memorandum memorialized such a discussion he had with his colleagues, including Kavanaugh. Starr does not mention this memorandum in his book, provide any detailed response to the points made by Rodriguez in his memorandum or resignation letter. So Starr is whitewashing the whole thing. And that's what he was there to do. Kenneth Starr was never there, never ever there to really dig into what happened in Arkansas with the Rose Law Firm, right? With Whitewater. He was there to foul things up because Kenneth Starr is connected to the Bush family, and the Bush family is connected to the Clintons. I'll keep reading here. This is an important part. Whether or not Starr's description of Rodriguez's questioning of witnesses is accurate, it is disingenuous given what a grand jury witness has said occurred to him under questioning from Kavanaugh. Before the grand jury, Starr complains about Rodriguez causing raised eyebrows by his accusatory questioning of U.S. Park police officer and other witnesses, and Rodriguez browbeating or mistreating grand jury witnesses, and causing Starr's deputy, Mark Tuahy, to be outraged by some of the stories you heard about Miguel's strange demeanor and off-the-wall questions in the grand jury room, which allegedly caused grand jurors to complain. Foster grand jury witness Patrick Knowlton, this guy is a very important figure here, describes as a much more harrowing experience after being subpoenaed. Knowlton was in Fort Marcy Park on the day Foster died. Knowlton was a very inconvenient witness for Starr because he credibly reported, as did others, a description of the Honda Accord in the parking lot at Fort Marcy when Foster was dead that did not match Foster's Honda Accord. They were two different Honda Accords. Also, as alleged in 1987, in his 1987 lawsuit, a copy of which is at FBIcoverup.com, the website he maintains with his attorney, John Clark, and researcher Hugh Turley, Knowlton also saw a man who has never been officially acknowledged in another car in the parking lot who gave him menacing stares. Knowlton has been stating for years that Kavanaugh tried to discredit him before the grand jury by improperly raising the possibility that Knowlton was in the park for a homosexual liaison, which was false. According to Knowlton, Kavanaugh did this with the assistant of now U.S. District Court Judge John Bates. None of this was ever brought up over the last week, was it? No. These are the points, the sticking points of Brett Kavanaugh that we should have been discussing, but we didn't, because what we were witnessing was a dog and pony show, a total dog and pony show, and one that forged our emotions in a way to support the process and the man associated with the process, having to answer to outrageous claims that were so completely unverifiable, that people, whether they even had a scintilla of doubt, in some ways had to side with the man, with the wife, with 2 kids, and the process itself. The real losers here are the American people, because our emotion was hijacked, our signal was hijacked. And at the same time, we had to, in some ways, check that box for order, continuity, and consistency, because something much larger was at stake. That was some degree of due process and civility. Isn't that right, Jasper? That's right. These are things that never came to our attention. Wasn't part of the discussion. Will it be part of the discussion tomorrow? Likely not. All right, let me check back in with the chat room, see how people are doing. Jasper, you're making my life a little more difficult here than I need to, buddy. Let's see what we got going on in the chat room. Yep. Our signal, absolutely. And look, I saw it. I saw what was going on. I tried to be as dispassionate as possible. You know? Absolutely. Oh, JFK Jr. is alive. That alone is huge news. So apparently, speaking of which, Suge Knight's son claims that Tupac Shakur is still alive and that he's living in Malaysia. I can't corroborate that. Those things you mentioned would never be, of course they wouldn't. Of course they would never be mentioned. But that's, I mean, look, if we really want to get into this whole kind of being red-pilled and going down the rabbit hole, and if we're really, really, really invested in truth, like the majority of people say they are, then it needs to be part of the dialogue, and people need to be informed. You know, I've been talking about the cover-up in the Vince Foster case for a while and alluding to this stuff for the Patriot Act for a while. This is Jasper, by the way, getting in on the show. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And we can wrap up, I think, this whole piece around Brett Kavanaugh now, because the rest will be history, literally and figuratively. It would drain the swamp fast. Yeah, definitely drain the swamp. With Venus going retrograde, this should be an interesting couple of months. I agree with that. It's going to be a lot of muck. A lot of mucky muck. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the place that I live and some interesting developments that are happening on the internet. Unconditional love. Thank you, Jill. Unconditional love to the world. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I live in a place called Fredericksburg. It's kind of an interesting place. I'm going to read you the description. There's a point. I'm going somewhere with this. So I'm just going to give you the background of Fredericksburg. It was founded in 1846, and it was named after Prince Frederick of Prussia. Old-time German residents often refer to Fredericksburg as Fritztown, We call it Fritz here. The town is also notable as the home of Texas German dialect, spoken by the first generations of German settlers who initially refused to learn English. So it's a type of German. It's a Texan German. Fredericksburg shares many cultural characteristics with New Braunfels, which had been established by Prince Karl of Salms-Braunfels the previous year. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background here on the establishment of Fredericksburg. As long as Jasper allows me to do that. Being very needy today, extremely needy. Jasper, being kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest with you. Okay, so Fredericksburg was founded in 1846 by Baron Ottfried Hans von Musbach, new commissioner general of the Society for the Protection of German Immigrants in Texas, also known as the Noblemen's Society. Now, these people were interesting. The emigration was in part the liberal educated Germans fleeing the social, political, and economic conditions that later resulted in the Revolution of 1848, and in part working class Germans. Baron von Musbach renounced his noble title and became known in Texas as John O. Musbach. The area's Barons Creek was named in Musbach's honor. So here we go. I'm going to get past, we get into the town founding. In 1845, Musbach set out from New Braunfels, traveling 60 miles northwest to select the second settlement of the Fisher-Miller land grant. He opted for a valley between two creeks, which are now known as Barons Creek and Town Creek, and surrounded by 7 hills. He named it in honor for Prince Frederick of Prussia, the highest-ranking member of the Mainzer Adelsverein, and nephew of King Frederick William III of Prussia. For the settlement, he purchased 10,000 acres on credit for an allotment per settler of 1 lot, 1 town lot plus 10 acres of farmland. In December 1845, on orders from Musbach, Lieutenant Louis Ludwig Bene, with lead surveyor Johann Jacob Roos, and crew constructed a road from New Braunfels to the site of Fredericksburg. So the people that came here to Fredericksburg, Musbach and a lot of the Prussians that came to this area were what's known as free thinkers. And essentially what they were doing is they were leaving political and religious dogma behind. And they were able to do this for a couple of years. And then what happened was Texas became a state, and then there was the Civil War. So the actual community, which at that time was trying to, create like its own land, its own patch of sort of free commerce and the freedom to worship whatever God they were worshiping. I think they were Lutherans, but they did their mass in Latin, which Lutherans generally didn't do. It was very strange to see Germans doing a Latin mass. But this is a very interesting area because the people that actually left Germany, they did so for philosophical reasons. They wanted to be, quote unquote, free. They wanted to be able to speak their mass in their language, which at that time was Latin, go figure. And they also wanted to get out of what was taking place at that time in Germany, which was, of course, a revolution. So they wanted their own little patch of heaven to set out and make it a part of their lives and their future. It lasted just 2 years. And then they got swept up into everything. But the reason I'm bringing this up is just to give you some context as to this place that I'm living in. The other thing that's really interesting was Musbach's relationship with the locals, i.e. the Comanche. I'm going to read this. This gives you an idea about the karmic relationship between this place and the land. It says here, the reddish blonde-haired John O. Musbach was named El Sol Colorado, the Red Sun, by the Penataka Comanche chief, Ketamotsi, who had encountered Musbach and his group in the area of present-day Mason. That's about 30 miles west of here. Musbach, accompanied by geologist Ferdinand von Romer, special agent Robert Neighbors, F. Schubert, Jean-Jacques von Kohl, and trader John F. Torrey, interpreter Anton Felix Hans Helmuth von Bucher. It's another guy that was a part of it, brokered the 1847 treaty between the Comanche and the German Immigration Company. The treaty was unique in that it did not take away the rights of the Penataka Comanche, but was an agreement that the Comanche and settlers would mutually share the land, coexisting in peace and friendship with Musbach. Musbach paid the Penataka Comanches $3,000, slightly less than $70,000 in today's money, in food, gifts, and other commodities for their participation in signing the agreement. The Native American signers of the treaty were only from the Penataka Band. It is one of the few treaties with Native American tribes that was never broken. So, the land here has good karma. Good karma. So we have free thinkers who came here to settle, wanting to move away from political and religious dogma. And they did a good deal with the natives, and they stood by their deal. So this is the place that I'm living. Now, one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is because there is something new and exciting happening on the internet. And the internet, when it started, was a place where we could be free. Theoretically, we could be anonymous. A lot of the stuff on the internet was free at that time. It's not free anymore. It's always some little catch, right, on the internet now. But there was free stuff on the internet. Napster, you had free music. The internet became this new outpost, and we colonized it. And now, unfortunately, the internet has become this portal of the surveillance state because we're so tied into it. And all of our information, all of our data, even our emotions are locked into this grid. Tim Berners-Lee, one of the founders of the internet, who actually started the internet at CERN, is onto something new. He wants to create a new internet. There's always going to be free thinkers. There are always going to be people that are searching for that new land that is untampered with and unexploited. In this case, it's virtual real estate. I'm going to read this. This is Tim Berners-Lee tells us his radical new plan to upend the World Wide Web. This is from Fast Company, by the way. With an ambitious decentralized platform, the father of the web hopes it's game on for corporate tech giants like Facebook and Google. Last week, Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web, asked me to come see a project he has been working on almost as long as the web itself. It's a crisp autumn day in Boston where Berners-Lee works out of an office above a boxing gym. After politely offering me a cup of coffee, he leads us into a sparse conference room. At one end of the long table is a battered laptop covered with stickers. Here on this computer, he is working on a plan to radically alter how all of us live and work on the web. The intent is world domination, Berners-Lee says with a wry smile. The British-born scientist is known for his dry sense of humor, but in this case, he is not joking. This week, Berners-Lee will launch Inrupt, a startup that has been building in stealth mode. He has been building in stealth mode for the past 9 months, backed by Glasswing Ventures. Its mission is to turbocharge a broader movement afoot among developers around the world to decentralize the web and take back power from the forces that have profited from centralizing it. In other words, it's game on for Facebook, Google, Amazon. For years now, Berners-Lee and other internet activists have been dreaming of a digital utopia where individuals control their own data and their internet remains free and open. But for Berners-Lee, the time for dreaming is over. We have to do it now, he says, displaying an intensity and urgency that is uncharacteristic for the soft-spoken academic. It's a historical moment. Ever since revelations emerged that Facebook had allowed people's data to be misused by political operatives, Berners-Lee has felt an imperative to get this digital idol into the real world. In a post published this weekend, Berners-Lee explains that he is taking a sabbatical from MIT to work full-time on Inrupt. The company will be the first major commercial venture built off of Solid, a decentralized web platform he and others at MIT have spent years building. So the subhead here is a Netscape for today's internet. If all goes as planned, Inrupt will be to Solid what Netscape was for many first-time users of the web, an easy way in. And like with Netscape, Berners-Lee hopes Inrupt will be just the first of many companies to emerge from Solid. I've been imagining this for a very long time, says Berners-Lee. He opens up his laptop and starts tapping at his computer. Watching the inventor of the web work at his computer feels like what it might have been to watch Beethoven compose a symphony. It's riveting, but hard to fully grasp. We're in the Solid world now, he says, his eyes lit up with excitement. He pushes the laptop toward me so I can see. On his screen, there is a simple-looking web page with tabs across the top. Tim's to-do list, his calendar, chats, address book. He built this app, one of the first on Solid for his personal use. It is simple, spare. In fact, it's so plain, at first glance, it's hard to see its significance. But to Berners-Lee, this is where the revolution begins. The app, using Solid's decentralized technology, allows Berners-Lee to access all of his data seamlessly. His calendar, his music library, videos, chat, research. It's like a mashup of Google Drive, Microsoft Outlook, Slack, Spotify, and WhatsApp. The difference here is that on Solid, all the information is under his control. Every bit of data he creates or adds on Solid exists within a Solid pod, which is an acronym for Personal Online Data Store. These pods are what give Solid users control over their applications and information on the web. Anyone using the platform will get a Solid identity and a Solid pod. This is how people, Berners-Lee says, will take back the power of the web from corporations. For example, one idea Berners-Lee is currently working on is a way to create a decentralized version of Alexa, Amazon's increasingly ubiquitous digital assistant. He calls it Charlie. Unlike with Alexa, on Charlie, people would own all their data. That means they could trust Charlie. For example, health records, children's school events, or financial records. That is the kind of machine Berners-Lee hopes will spring up all over for Solid to flip the power dynamics of the web from corporations to individuals. A new revolution for developers. Berners-Lee believes Solid will resonate with the global community of developers, hackers, and internet activists who bristle over corporate and government control of the web. Developers have always had a certain amount of revolutionary spirit, he observes. Circumventing government spies or corporate overlords may be the initial lure of Solid, but the bigger draw will be something even more appealing to hackers: freedom. In the centralized web, data is kept in silos controlled by the companies that build them, like Facebook and Google. In the decentralized web, there are no silos. Starting this week, developers around the world will be able to start building their own decentralized apps with tools through the Inrupt site. Berners-Lee will spend this fall crisscrossing the globe, giving tutorials and presentations to developers about Solid and Inrupt. What's great about having a startup versus research group is things get done, he says. These days, instead of heading off to his lab at MIT, Berners-Lee comes to the Inrupt offices, which are currently based out of Genero Digital, a company that he has contracted to help work on Inrupt. For now, the company consists of Berners-Lee, his partner John Bruce, who built Resilience, a security platform bought by IBM, a handful of on-staff developers contracted to work on the project, and a community of volunteer coders. Later this year, Berners-Lee plans to start looking for more venture funding and grow his team. The aim for her now is not to make billions of dollars. Not to make billions. The man who gave the web away for free has never been motivated by money. Still, his plans could impact billion-dollar business models that profit off of control over data. It's not likely that the big powers of the web will give up control without a fight. When asked about this, Berners-Lee says flatly, "We are not talking to Facebook and Google about whether or not to introduce a complete change where all their business models are completely upended overnight. We are not asking for their permission." Game on. Okay, so I brought up this story about Fredericksburg because it represented a group of people, to some extent, much like the group of people that came from Holland, came from England through Holland to this country, the Pilgrims, which I've talked about before, to move into new space. Whether or not they did that in a way that was graceful and mindful, one can say in many instances, globalization and colonization has not been a graceful and mindful process. However, here in this part of the world, a very, very small instance it was, which gives us some hope that a conscious relationship with wherever it is that we're going can be brought into that fold. And I wanted to tell you about this and connect to what Tim Berners-Lee is doing, because as humans, we have this innate spirit to pioneer something, to be free, to become untangled from situations that are burdened with over-gravitation. Now, that doesn't mean we skirt personal responsibility. You see, Tim Berners-Lee is taking responsibility for the type of world he wants to live in and wants other people to live in. And there's a lesson there in that. The people that came here from Germany had to get into the land, and they had to work with the land. They ran out of money. They had a very hard time for a while, but they took personal responsibility for their relationship in this place. So being free and wanting to explore new space also has with it a certain level of responsibility. It comes with the game. It comes with the package. But this is an exciting trend, an exciting development, especially in lieu of the fact that we've been talking about Brett Kavanaugh and the Fourth Amendment and surveillance and the surveillance state. And if we could actually populate a decentralized web, take control of our information, that to me is a paradigm shift. So everybody out there, say a little prayer for Tim Berners-Lee and his band of revolutionaries so that we can reshape the internet, how we exchange information, how we control it, how ultimately that even affects our own consciousness. To me, this is a great development. All right, let me check back in with you people in the chat room, see where we are, what's going on here. With all this information in the decentralized web, there are no silos. But all this information has already been stolen. Yeah, but there's going to be new information coming on, right? Kids will be born. You know, they'll acquire their own bits of information. They'll acquire their own data. So, you know, put a cap on it so that future generations have a better shot. That's my piece. Yeah. Have you tried? I've tried to find your show live. Thank you again for Deep Seeking Truth. Okay. Between that and Fediverse, new path on the horizon. Yeah. I think that's it for today. Okay, we're going to have the Kavanaugh show tomorrow. That'll be mildly interesting to watch. I think he will be confirmed. And that's when the next round of chaos will ensue. And we get to have fun with that. And a new scene emerges on the surreal theater in a post-Trump or post-elected Trump America. You're welcome, Rhonda Reynolds. All right, so I just want to remind you one more time that Heather, Elon and I are doing a really cool webinar on Jupiter and the nodes coming to you and us in 2019. You can find that on her website after the show. I'll post it on my webpage. I'll even put it in the link box here if you want to sign up for it. And that's on the 20th of October, and it's 2 o'clock Central Standard Time, 3 o'clock Eastern Time, and 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, if you're interested. I think it's pretty affordable too. And we'll probably be on there jamming for about 3 or 4 hours. You get a ton of information. Okay? All righty. Thank you, everybody. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. It's been great jamming with you today. I'll be back Sunday night for the live stream, Astro live stream. Probably talk about the new moon some more. Maybe go over what happened with Kavanaugh. Until then, have yourself a really great weekend. Okay? Bye for now.